This is the Technology, Finance, and Operations Subcommittee of the Wilbraham Regional School District. I guess I'll host until we do the reorganization. So a call to order. Why don't we start with the Pledge of Allegiance? There we go. Mike, do you want to lead us?
Sure. Pledge of allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. With that, this is our first meeting for the term. Do we have anyone that wants to nominate anyone for chair of the subcommittee?
Excuse me. I'll nominate Meg.
Second it?
I guess I accept.
You know, you gotta stop doing
Yeah,
that.
all right. I humbly and happily accept. How's that? Is that good?
Super.
All right.
Okay.
All right.
It's your meeting?
All right.
Oh, do we need to vote?
We need to vote. All right. All those in favor? Aye. Any? No, all right. We all voted in favor. Okay. All right. Discuss budget timeline and engagement. I didn't realize we didn't have our other town officials joining us for this meeting.
When I was planning the meeting, it was for us as a subcommittee to decide how do we want to do it, what do we want to do. I had a plan, but now this is your thing. So that's why I said I didn't want to have capital planning on here, because we would just be talking it amongst ourselves.
Which is okay. I don't know, I kind of have the philosophy, it's better to have things on there and not discuss them than the other way around.
You got it.
Which breaks rules. So, all right, so Doug and John, what are we looking at in terms of timeline this year? Like, when are we gonna start to know numbers enough to have a meaningful conversation at, like, basically our next meeting, right?
As I'm sure everybody remembers, Doug presented a timeline at the multi-board meeting. I asked several times for consensus on that. I think that no one objected, no one really said that's the way to go, but no one came up with any other plans. I think there was one comment about grants, maybe, but so basically I think our plan is to go with the timeline that Doug had presented at that time.
Yeah,
So can you just review what that is?
Yeah, I can just review it. So, starting last month, because now it's November, I started putting in and talking to both facilities and IT actually about capital projects that are coming up, and trying to get the sort of full breadth of those projects. I mean, last year we did the same exercise. We have a 10-year plan that we laid out. We'll go back to that and then modify and update that. Trying to get a little more detail, I think, for the purposes of meeting the requests of the towns relative to those capital projects. Some things are presented in ways that are newer, so those will have to go on the list. But I think one of the other things that I want to do, just from the standpoint of laying those out, as part of the work for this month under the sort of capital planning process, is to and I use the term universal capital needs, so I want to get everything on there, but then sort of parse out that which is covered by other sources. So if we're going to apply for CPA funds for playgrounds, or if we're going to use grant funding or E-rate money or any other sort of potential source of funds, try to identify what those are, how much, and potentially how likely some of them are. Some are much more likely than others, and kind of give that holistic picture of what all the ask is, and then what specifically is going to be particular asks from the communities for capital planning purposes. On the operating side, what has started but will be kicking in earnest this month in November is to meet with the administrators and directors about their coming year budgets, sort of what they're anticipating, it's sort of I was thinking about this today, and perhaps this isn't the best way to describe it, but it's sort of the this is the time of year when you ask for the Christmas list from everyone. Like, what would they, barring, constraints, which we know we will have, what are the things you're looking to do or need to do, and what's the scope of what you're trying to do? Where are places you want to, expend resources and things that you want to do? But we'll be, starting from a level services type budget, but there's some things that you know about your level services. If you know you're inheriting certain numbers of special ed students with certain numbers of costs, you've got to take that into account. Likewise, if you're losing kids, like kids that are, have expensive placements or are leaving, that's a resource available that you can use for other purposes. So kind of mapping that out with each of the directors and principals, thinking with, and working with the superintendent on objectives and targets and things like that and initiatives that we're trying to implement and put into play. And of course, we're looking at all resources that we have available. So there's, of course, the general fund or capital, resources from the towns, but we're looking at, what our state aid picture is looking like, what we think is going to happen with grants that might be available for us to use, how our entitlement grants might play out over the coming months, and we'll make, early adjustments and frame that up. What I'd like to do is by kind of middle of December is to have a pretty decent picture of both capital and operating to bring to the towns. But I'm certainly open to having conversations with them before that, because getting some sense of what they're seeing for revenue projections would be helpful in the course of this month and early next month, because that influences sort of what kind of gap we have between what we like and what we project we think we need and what resources we think are available to us. And so we've done a little bit of that kind of scoping in some of our negotiations, just for the sake of kind of framing the conversation. But it's still pretty rough. We'll be a little more refined with that. That's the work over the next couple months for sure.
Would you go to the meetings, or you mean just reaching out to them, or how would you do this?
Well, I think it's in some ways, kind of how do you guys want to, work with them in that regard?
I think we should start with a meeting here where we discuss with the designated representatives, and then I would expect that we would then get a feeling from them where they need us to go to help advocate for things, right? Because their activity on this is information gathering, right? We don't have the ability, none of us are empowered to negotiate, or they can't approve a budget, we can't approve a budget here, right? Or capital expenses. And so, so if what I'm hearing from you, somewhere in mid-December would probably be productive for us to have our next meeting, inviting the town officials, and we'll be able to start floating some ballpark numbers and hearing from them where they are.
Yeah, I mean, I would probably reach out, I'll probably try to reach out this month and talk to the town staff to see what they're thinking about, their revenue pictures and projections, see if they have some sense of where it's headed from a state aid standpoint. They're looking at things like, tax revenue collection by the state and, all those kinds of things. There's a lot of unknowns, but they'll know, what their experience has been and can help, see if there's something changing for the positive. They'll know what their free cash, which I think they've gotten certified. Certainly in Wilbraham they have. I don't know about Hamden's number.
I think Hamden has already committed the sum total balance of their free cash. So, as I understand it.
Yeah.
So, and Wilbraham, I think, is still choking on the MSBA, like even just the cost of the assessments, right, which is not insignificant.
Right.
Which kind of brings up that I think that if we're bringing other capital items forward this year, other than the MSBA assessments, I think we're going to need to be really thoughtful what we're asking for, because I don't think we're going to get a lot more beyond that. I mean, they seemed enthusiastic about at least doing the assessments. But then there's kind of the bigger questions out there, like with the middle school, should we be going for a more comprehensive assessment of the building in potential anticipation of bigger considerations? But that ups the cost, right?
Right, and so to speak to that, I don't want to sort of skip ahead of the agenda. One other thing I'll share first, before that is, so the towns have gotten their free cash certified. We received today, literally a few hours ago, our E&D certification, which was better than I had originally, expected it to be back in, August when I talked about last. So, we'll write this down. It's $1,276,971. So.
I didn't know the 971 part, but I heard that.
Yeah. So that's 2.23% of our operating budget. We're allowed to have up to 5. If you go over 5, you have to spend some of the money down or discount assessments in the coming years, so we're not close to that threshold. But that's encouraging in a way, because I think that gives us a little more latitude with supporting our budget. So when we talk about sources of funds, this is going to be in a little better shape than we maybe originally thought it was going to be.
Do you guys think we should direct Doug to kind of at least start with what we did last year, where we plan to keep 500 back and then contribute the rest towards the operating budget? That seemed to have support, or do you think we should be holding more back? What do you think, Michelle?
I'm not sure yet.
Okay, let's not put anything towards the operating budget then, and see.
I'm interested in this 10-year capital plan, what that looks like this year. I know we've had this sort of moving capital plan, we kind of push everything forward. So I'm curious to know what that 10-year plan looks like today. What items did we have planned for this year? What surprises have come up? What's rising to the top?
Yeah, I think we're still evaluating that, and some things are changing on a week-to-week and day-to-day basis, as is noted in your agenda, to some extent. So I think we're going to have to. We're still in the process of sort of reviewing that and compiling all the projects, and then sort of prioritizing and organizing them. And there are some things that we put forward last year, because again, I joined sort of mid-cycle, and there's some things that might have more urgency or both with the town as well as the schools that I wasn't aware of, and we might have been put forward instead of pushing back. We'll see. We'll make those adjustments as we go through that, and I work with the facility staff and others on those. But I do think, given the nature of the MSBA, that does sort of significantly change the dynamic of the conversation.
Can I just revisit that for a second?
Mm-hmm.
How much did you put in that budget that we've been working with when dealing with the union? How much did you put in from E&D into that budget? Yeah.
I want to say 700,000.
Right.
Which would leave roughly 500,000. But
so if we're not putting that 700,000 in, then that just adds to the FTEs that we're going to have to.
Yeah, the differences we've been showing between revenues and expenses, but.
Or the assessment.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I used a very modest, assessment amount, which was less than the current year assessment for, less than the combined assessment of the two towns.
Mm-hmm.
Just because I think that, the sense I got from both towns in going through last year's process was that they, sort of bumped up the number above what they would, were comfortable with.
Right.
Not to the extent that what you, as a school committee, were asking for, but so I have an expectation that they may trend back towards what they normally would support for a budget, but we'll see what the conversation's like, what's shaping up in their budget.
You mean as an absolute number or a percent of the budget? Because I think that this is one of our communication differences.
Right. I mean,
Because here they'd be like, oh, well, it should never go up more than 500 a year. And it should never go up more than 750 a year. But as the budget has grown, that $700,000 is a smaller and smaller percentage of the budget, right? And things tend to increase by percentages.
right. And I think that's where I think these early conversations are helpful. We can normalize around, all right, well, how do we want to discuss this? Do we want to talk dollars? Do we want to talk percents? And what's the advantage of each or disadvantage of each? And be clear about that so there's no misunderstanding around those kinds of things. So
Are we also gonna have conversations with the town about this giant gap that we have in our budget right now? Are we gonna address that? Are we
You mean
going
this
to-
year's budget? That's already.
I'm
in
sorry, 2027's budget.
We don't have that budget done yet. We're expecting a gap
But we're expecting a gap.
because we're in, but we don't actually know what it is, right?
Right, but do we wanna let them know that early projections have us at a significant gap? Especially when you add
Do
back
they know at
the
this point, Doug?
700.
No, the town would, well, I take that back. In Wilbraham, they kind of know because the chair of the select board is sitting on the negotiations team. So
Yeah.
he would know. He has probably not shared a ton of that with them because again, the sort of confidentiality negotiation.
Correct.
Part of it. And I doubt that Hampton knows really at all. And again, you know, sort of early days, but it's not surprising when you sort of first put, like, very first put things together that that you're gapped. Because again, you haven't gone back and reviewed where your real expenses are, where are some things that you don't, you know, you might have had some expenses you don't, that aren't recurring, that, you know, you might be able to peel out, or whatever. So it's not atypical to be, on a level services budget, short some amount of money, and that's part of what happens between when you put things together initially in November and the end of January, when I actually put a budget in front of the school committee. It may still have a gap, but hopefully it's much more refined in what that is, because again, there's a lot of assumptions that are built into that, but hopefully the more explicit parts of, you know, budget expense are known at that point, you know, as far as like, what's our overall picture of FTE, and where our, you know, steps and whatnot, and it's a little chunky because we still have open negotiations with contracts, but, you know, the amount of unknown by that point starts to shrink, and you know, and again, I think, you know, engaging with the towns to sort of start those conversations, and I think also it's important that when you engage with them in the broader public, it's, you know, what you put into the public realm gets locked in folks' minds, you know,
Right.
so you wanna, you know, have those several moments where you do specific steps, and that you have, you know, rationale for what is and isn't known, and then what's changed, and so that you can discuss that, and so people won't be locked in and about, you know,
It's like you're
Those
reading
numbers.
my mind, Doug, with my concerns. Like, we want to give them numbers as soon as possible, but, and you guys have been doing this longer than me, I fully acknowledge, but the most trouble I've seen and the most emotion and the biggest is like, the numbers come out, but then they're not the numbers, and then the numbers change, and then all I hear is like 1,000 conversations and people go, oh my God, the numbers, they're changing, and what's going on, can't you guys even use a calculator, and blah, 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 and you want us to give you more than half of our budget, and you don't know how to count, and so,
Well, it's the
I'm
nature
in
of the
favor of
budget.
informing the towns as soon as
Yeah.
possible, but I want them to have real numbers.
Okay.
Yeah, and I know the final numbers aren't until the end of January, and
Actually,
then
no,
there'll be
the
a
final
lot-
numbers are when
when you guys vote in March.
yeah,
That's
when we
when
vote in March, that's when they're tied in, but also we don't even know when the numbers are final until the House and reconciliation with the governor's budget and the Senate budget, and everyone puts it all together, and that happens in the summer sometimes, so.
Right, so that aspect of the budget, unless they do, and this has happened over the years where, you know, they'll sometimes, the House and Senate, and particularly this happens when there's a lot of concern about the budget, they'll sometimes do, you know, a local aid resolution, and they'll lock in a number in early March maybe that helps know, you know, lets everyone know it's no less than this much, so that they can budget a little bit more precisely.
Right.
So they'll make a clear picture of what's local aid gonna look like, they'll make a clear picture of what chapter 70 looks like. You know, from my seat, I like it when they do that, you know, because it it sort of solidifies the sort of conversations that you're having with your town about, you know, what they can do and what they can't do, and what the district's gonna need to do to sort of get to a balanced budget. You know, as we go through those last, you know, things and vote a budget and try to go to town meeting and get approval. But, you know, often, as has been the case in most recent years, it's, you know, it's well into July, sometimes August before we find a final number. So, you know, we're gonna have to pick something before that. You know.
By March, right?
Right, and so the governor's budget comes out in January. We'll, you know, before we hand a budget to the school committee, it's gonna be a sort of first blush, you know, we'll wait till we get that governor's number, because that'll make a big difference, because that'll be the first, you know, sense of what chapter 7 is gonna look like for us, and that's gonna, you know, sometimes the difference aren't too big, but at the same time, you know, they can be. You know, if the governor comes out and says $150 per student for the whole Cardinals districts, that's a much different number than they've had in the past. That's where they've landed this year, but that, you know, the governor may or may not be that aggressive with their budgeting. So we'll have to see, you know. You know, the law specifically is $30 per student, so, which is a much smaller number. And they haven't used that number in a couple of years now, so.
Right.
Yes.
And I don't think
They've
that
been
the
doing much better
conversations.
for us with that. So they've been doing much better with the per student
Yeah.
money for that, which is nice because it equalizes across all the districts.
Yeah, I think the conversations that are going on with regard to, you know, sort of school funding in chapter 70, my sense, and this is just my sense, I don't think they'll have it resolved in this budget year. I just don't think they're gonna be that fast. I mean, I think they're gonna be thoughtful about it. I think they've got a better sense of what the fair share amendment produces for the state. So I think they can be more, they can, you know, leverage that in their calculations to make some adjustments potentially to chapter 7, but I don't think they're gonna get their way through it
Yeah.
in this budget cycle. You know,
The information we received last week was that the report is not due for this budget cycle.
yeah,
So,
yeah, I would have been shocked if it had done it once, but frankly, because that would be,
be hard to
Very,
see how
very
good it
fast.
is. Right.
you know,
So-
that'd be very, very fast. Be nice
So,
if it was
so back to my original question, do you think that we'll have numbers valuable enough to start conversations sometime in December?
I do,
Okay,
I do.
all right, so we can plan a meeting in December with the town officials, and it would probably be good if the numbers are hard enough, if you can distribute them by email 24 hours before the meeting, so people have a chance to look at them, and if there's emotional shock, get over the emotional shock and that part of it, so that we can have, you know, instead of, you know, the grand disclose with the
You know, one thing I've been thinking of, to your point of trying to resolve this tension, because we've tried it both ways, right? We've tried providing information really soon, really early on in the process, which changed a lot because there was a lot of uncertainty, and then we tried providing it later when there would be greater certainty. The concern at that point was, well, it was kind of late to get the information, it would have been better to know this earlier. So, you know, I think in terms of confidence intervals, and I wonder if sort of conveying that might be a way of saying, like, our first step numbers we share might be plus or minus 5% or whatever we think it is. And as we get closer to that, the edges will be narrower and narrower until we get as close to the numbers we think it can be.
as someone who does a lot of statistics and epidemiology research, I love the concept of confidence intervals. If we're confident of them. Relatively.
Well, there will be some that will be you know, fairly comfortable with. You know, some things that we know pretty, you know, with some level of certainty. You know, if we have existing contracts that have fixed inflationary components to it, so like some of the software we signed a 3-year deal, it's like, oh, it's 4% per year. Well, we can give you the exact number for that, right? You know, hopefully in December, you know, our retirement assessment will come out. That will be a fixed number. And, you know, that can be one of those where a percentage point or two is hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? So it makes a big difference when those kind of things lock in. On the other hand, insurance, for like health insurance in particular, we probably won't have the firm official number until, you know, late January, early February. So that's gonna be one of those that's gonna be much more fluid, you know. Now, we'll have a meeting or two in between where we'll have some conversations with the group about that. There may be some sense of how it's trending, but, you know, we'll have to, you know, wait until, like I said, like January, February, I think, when the group needs to set those in a formal way. So, you know, there's a lot of fluidity to pricing for health insurance. You know, we've seen, you know, communities around us that have huge increases, and then 2 months later, another huge increase, with, you know, which unexpected in some respects, which I hope we, you know, and I don't think we'll experience. At the same time, you know, our insurance went up 4% this year. I don't anticipate it will be as low as that this coming year. I think it's gonna be higher than that. Hopefully it's not 15. Because it just, you know, it will change our conversation significantly over the course of really the month of February, because we'll, you know, significantly change what we can
We'll
afford.
just change the conversation, it will change the number of teacher layoffs.
Right, right. Or whatever other, you know,
That's a big,
Let's
that's
call
a
it
big dollar.
FTE layoffs, because hopefully there won't be
FTE
teachers.
layoffs.
right,
FTE layoffs. Yeah.
right.
So,
I think it's important just to be able to begin the discussions together, though. I find
Yeah.
it to be very helpful. I think for all parties involved, when we're all sitting at the same table, being able to have a conversation, understanding what's happening in the towns. It's not, they're, you know, it's not hearsay, it's not, well, I heard from somebody. They can ask questions, refine information, clarify information, just understand where each other's coming from and work towards a solution together rather than waiting and saying, oh, well, we don't have enough time, you know, we can have a discussion. So I think it's really helpful, regardless of how good our numbers are in December, to all come together and meet, because our respective liaisons, they do report back to their select boards and their finance board, so I think it's a worthwhile event.
absolutely.
Now, I've noted that at least in Wilbraham, they'd like to have different individuals involved with the capital discussion. Would you envision that as one meeting where we discuss both capital and operating, or a separate meeting where we?
I think we can do it as one. I mean, the challenge is capital falls into sort of three categories. There's regional capital, which gets assessed, and then there's capital requests for each of the towns. But all of that's part of their financial planning for the year. So I would, you know, if I'd be able to link the, and we may not go into some of the detail of capital projects too much. I mean, I think we can go into more detail for the current fiscal year, those asks that are coming up for, you know, July 1 of 2026. I think that would be the key things to focus on in talking about capital, and you know, obviously if they have questions about any of the things, you know, sort of overarching plan of things, that's going to be important. But I think that the MSBA question is going to prove to be, you know, it's going to be so commingled with that, it may require its own distinct conversation specifically around that. But I think that, you know,
I mean, the feeling I've gotten from the towns is that they have their specific capital process that they do at a specific time, which isn't gonna be until in the spring with their capital committees. I think it's good to kind of give an overview, hey, this is what's going on at the meeting in December, but we need to all kind of mentally note that that's not the official presentation of the capital requests, and that we're going to need to behold ourselves to their process.
Right, so
The individual town's process, which happen at slightly different times.
Right, and if we lay out a certain set of projects, you know, partly based on history and urgency in our mind, and they're of the opinion, it's like, we have nowhere near that much money, and we have these other things that we have to do, then we reshape our conversation around how we do capital and what we can do there. So I think it's important to sort of get in front of them and get some, you know, initial response. Because hopefully, some of them, if not the town staff itself, like, the town administrators and or the financial folks, have some sense of the scope that they can accommodate or are planning for as a total approach to capital for the coming year. But they may not at that point. It may be too early for them too, but to sort of scope this and give them some sense of it. And again, I think that's part of why it's important when we put capital in front of them is to speak to some of those other sources of funds. So like with MSBA, there's a pretty significant benefit, from being in that process. It's in fiscal 24, it would have been, or fiscal 25, it would have been 57% reimbursement, which means 43 cents on the dollar is what we have to come up with. So that's,
Right.
the total project cost is like shocking, and then when you cut it in half, it's still shocking, it's just not shocking, but not everything's like that, but some things are, and so there's different sources. So to have that be in front of them, it's like, here's the totality of the capital, here's the parts we're asking you for. So, for example, E-rate, it's a great source of support for technology things. And there's a certain amount we have that we can spend over, they do it in 5-year increments. But when we leverage it, it covers half the cost. So, that can be really profound in understanding, here's the total cost of what here's what we're asking for you. Just to, indicate that there's, these other sources we're definitely trying to tap into and are available. That's the thing with MSBA too, it's like there's a source, we've all paid into. All of these other sources are ones we've all paid into, we should take advantage of them, in much the same way that other communities are as well.
But they only pay half, so we need to be in the position to take advantage too.
Right, that's right. So, and with capital, and, technology is a perfect example, it's like, there's a expected life, of these things that we have, and we want to be pretty timely with making the switches or whatever else we're buying. So we, it has less flexibility than it feels like it has in some respects. You can keep saying no, but at some point you can't, and that's true whether it be physical structures or technological investments or vehicles or whatever the case may be.
But having some degree of outside support from the state in the form of grant or those kind of programs, I think really helps us garner support.
Right.
The town administrators.
Right.
Like if we were able to get a disabilities grant of some kind for the bleachers, I think the town administrators might start to have a different perspective towards that project. Whereas right now, it doesn't look like they're getting done until they literally fall down.
They are.
I'm with you, Sean, but.
No, they are literally falling apart.
Just the seats though, the frame is still there, albeit ever so rusty, and I hope everyone's had a tetanus shot that goes up there. Let's not digress into that. I think everyone in this room is on the exact same page when it comes to the bleachers. The other thing in long-term capital that has been causing me to lose a little bit of sleep lately is the turf field. How many more years do we have left on the turf field?
So, my understanding was installed in 2019, so typically about a decade is what you have. So 2029 would be the replacement. And the good news about that sort of a field is that it's most expensive the first time you put it in because there's a bunch of infrastructure you put underneath it for drainage and that sort of stuff. When you resurface, you're generally spending somewhat less because that's already there. It's still $1 million.
Okay.
It wasn't.
It was $1 million.
Yeah,
So it's
well,
gonna be-
in 2029, will it be $1 million?
Exactly.
So it's 5. So we've got 4 years, and we're gonna need to do the turf field.
Yeah.
And is the turf field something that can be like put off and delayed until it's like literally ripping and falling apart? Or is it something that we are generally expected to have replaced as part of our responsible membership in competitive sports? Because other schools, it's not just us making decisions for our own kids, but other towns' kids could potentially, encounter negative performance, injuries, so forth, if it's not in proper condition.
Yeah, I think that's part of the conversation to replace it, is that, you know, it is both our children and other people's children that are on this, and there's a level of degradation that will, I mean, the same is true with a track. You know, if you don't, there's a point where you can't patch a track anymore, then you have to resurface it. And they'll get to a point where they're like, you can no longer hold the fence here. You know, I come from a district where that happens, like, no track meets for multiple years.
So I don't see either town being in the position to handle $1 million capital project for the school district. Period, unless money has been saved ahead. That's where we are with the bleachers, and that's where we are with the field, and then pretty soon is, if you put the bleachers together with the turf, now we're looking at $2.5, maybe $3 million by the time we get to 2029, right? So, probably what we should be talking about in regards to those, and maybe we'll see what people start to think, is either we're starting to save, or the plan is we're gonna do a regional bond, and maybe do both of that, you know, maybe do both in 2030 or 2029. Of course, it kills me for the bleachers to wait that long, but, you know.
Well, there's also, I mean, there's different approaches you can take relative to borrowing. So you can authorize borrowing for something like that's more immediately needed, start the pay down process, and then, you know, add a second. I mean, there are places where, and communities that manage capital exclusively through debt, because they share the burden across multiple years. And so, yes, you pay the financing charges of interest, which, you know, until the last couple of years were really modest for, you know, 1% for the last 20 years, but in the last couple of years, it's gone up to about 3.5 to 4.5, is what I'm seeing when I get reports on this. So, you know, but you share that cost over multiple years because the useful life is multiple years, and so those people all contributed to that, you know, to the ownership of that in a sense. So there's a couple of ways to do it, and you can stagger them. So you can do things where you borrow. You can do what's called a BAN, which is a bond anticipation note, which is a 1-year borrowing, and you can just renew those and, you know, add new things and pay things, and you can manage that until you're ready to do a bigger bond. So you may not bond until 2029, but you can still borrow with these short-term projects until you sort of build up to a place where it's like, all right, now it's worthwhile to do a bond, or if the bond market's favorable, or there's a whole host of ways to approach that kind of thing.
Is there a reason why maybe involving the boosters into doing another fundraiser for the field for $1 million? We have 4 years. Is there a reason why that's not in there as an option as well? Why do we have to-
Absolutely.
I think
Why we have to borrow
it's a
money
wonderful option.
and
I don't think we'll get,
put it on the taxpayers when we could have families out there or.
in reality, they didn't raise the full amount of money for the initial install. And so, like, when you, like buying a car, right? When you borrow
Well,
money.
COVID hit when they were raising money for it, you know what I mean? So they installed it before they had the money raised because they wanted, you know, the kids to be able to enjoy the field. And then COVID hit and that put everything, I think, into disarray. I don't know, that would be my first place that I would go
It's an interesting
for
thought.
everything.
Are we within our ability to invite the boosters to come to a school committee meeting and see if they want to engage in the plan, in a long-term plan to begin saving money, some of the money they're raising every year, to be able to make a sizable contribution in 4 to 5 years towards the sports complex?
Yeah.
Can do that.
That doesn't violate any rules or anything, to beg from them and.
I think this is where that capital plan, the 10-year
Yeah.
plan, and looking at realistically, what projects are we looking at? Anticipated, not anticipated, because, we've known about the turf since it was installed, right? We knew that was gonna expand, so it's just about proper planning, but I think there's a lot of room for different opportunities, for us to be able to be creative with being able to fund some of these other projects. I think, we talked about schools needing playground equipment, or, those are capital, but, CPA funds have come into
Right.
play. So looking towards those other opportunities that we could utilize to maybe offset some of the costs that.
Again, and as we say with MSBA funds, we can say to the towns, hey, 50% will be covered by the state, so this big project suddenly became half the size of a burden. And if we can get the boosters to come up with a certain amount, maybe the whole amount, maybe a part of the amount or something, and find other ways, so when we go to the towns, and we can say, look, it's $1 million or $2 million, whatever it is, and we have 50%, 75%, 85%, whatever the percentage is, and maybe doing the same for the bleachers as well. I don't know, this is, it's gonna take a lot of work from somebody. Unfortunately, our participation in fundraising is severely limited because we are elected officials and we cannot ask someone to give money to a cause because that's, against the ethics and conflict of interest and stuff like that. So, hey, give money to my organization and, your kids are in our schools, it's.
So we can talk to the boosters.
But we can talk to the boosters
But that's
about it.
kind of what
Yeah.
their roles, it's just,
And they can
I'm kind of
decide if they
envisioning.
want to commit to some target or something like that.
And I think that would be, with this 4 years ahead, this might be a good time to have that.
So, it's just, I envision with their capabilities and money flow, that they might be able to raise $300,000 or $400,000, but not $3 million.
Well, over 4 years.
I think we have a lot of really intelligent,
Yeah.
savvy people in our part of our community,
Yeah.
on all
Yeah.
of the boards, and I think this is a really worthwhile conversation beyond this table, beyond the school committee, and
Yeah.
I think it's just about getting the information out there, and I think people would be happy to help.
Super. If we can, I did want to talk about last year, right? When we were talking about the timeline and engagement, like, what did we like about what happened last year? What do we dislike about, like, what do we want to do? What do we want to avoid from last year? I'm not even talking previous years, really last year, because I know last year was, we had more meetings at, the finance, we went to their meetings rather than call them to our meetings. We met with advisory a couple times, and I know we met with capital a couple times and stuff like that. Like, what did you like about what we did, and what would you like to see us not do again?
The gestalt feeling I had was that when it came acute time, like the budget was rocking, I feel like we didn't have many of these meetings. And I feel like we could have used more of these meetings then, like the kind of working and sleeve rolling up. And yes, we were meeting we were meeting the full school committee and the thing, and we weren't in agreement and all that kind of stuff. But I'm wondering, if another 1 or 2 of these meetings timed properly, when we know the real numbers and the town is harder on their numbers, that we can maybe have a better chance of coming together on a number before, we're voting things into stone, and when you draw one line in the sand and then they draw the other line in the sand, then you automatically have now a conflict because you have 2 lines in the sand. But
This is your meeting to call now,
yeah,
I would recommend, as I had recommended with the full committee, that we have a representative at every meeting, or at least with finance, capital, and advisory, like every time they meet, have one of us there or whatever, but it would be a lot with 3 people to do that, but.
well, they have a lot of work to do though, and I mean, there are certain meetings where they're discussing the schools and we should be there.
So my 2 cents is that we may have met once in December. We didn't meet, we didn't have how we typically met with both towns and having everybody at the table. I found that to be difficult to navigate conversations, and yes, we would go to the finance committee meetings, but it wasn't always purposeful, and I mean in the sense that we would show up, but we weren't on the agenda, we weren't invited to speak, so it was just showing up and maybe just showing that we're shared our presence. But I didn't find that to be incredibly productive. And I think that if we have a normally scheduled meetings, it doesn't have to start now because, I mean, obviously, we've had years where we started in September and that's too early. But I think that, being able to have that conversation so people can relay information, everybody's hearing the same information. It's not, making these guesses and accusations. So I think that would be more helpful. And again, we've had, find a time that works for everybody. I know it's challenging, especially the later we get into the year with the holidays and work schedules. It is difficult, but I think that we can figure out a way to make it work. And if we use our time wisely and efficiently, I don't think people will mind showing up.
Sure.
And if we have to have the larger group meetings, I think that's great. But I do think these meetings are valuable.
Okay. And the only thing I would add to that is you both had strong opinions about that, but did you have a conversation with me as chair before? I would ask us that if you have some opinions like this, that we talk to Mike, the chair, give him that communication and feedback so he can pivot as we move forward. I would just say that would be something that from Michelle and I would be a good thing to help Mike in
I will
his
do my
challenge.
best to pivot to make everyone happy.
Or whatever word you like.
The other piece quickly is that the school committee also is like telling the subcommittee what to do. This committee does not operate on our own and make decisions on how we're going to do, so it's really
Well, he
at
can
the.
decide when he meets and doesn't meet.
But I guess my point is, it's never one person's meeting, so regardless of who's chair, it's not, Mike, no offense, it's not your meeting, it wasn't your meeting, if I was chair, it wouldn't be my meeting, right? It's the
Well, it
subcommittee
was my
meeting.
name for a little bit, so you took me away.
But I just mean that it's really about,
Usually the
collective.
chair, it's the chair's meeting, the chair calls a meeting or whatever. Like, for example, we have a school committee meeting, you call me.
I call it to order, I don't call the meeting, but it's really at the entire committee, so, but anyway, that's just, take it or leave it.
Okay.
To that point, I think we've gotten through December of Doug's timeline. Could you share when else you would imagine us meeting so that we can get feedback from
Yeah,
the
so I think that from the, and I've hinted at this a little bit, but a sort of full first draft of the budget for both regional, for operating and capital, would be presented at the January 22nd school committee, the second meeting of the month. I have to check the actual, there's some specific dates the governor has to have their budget out. I think it precedes that a little bit. So, we would do, and so I would give a first walk through the budget with all the services and talk in with a little more precision than the conversation we had in December about that. Obviously, like I said, into the month and beginning of February, we get information about more state information, better information about our insurance. Those are huge as far as the impacts, can be positive or negative, hopefully positive. And so we do a second draft of the budget in late February, so a month later, basically. With the goal of being, at the middle of March, to a final budget. So, it could be a circumstance where you have, as a committee, I believe, have traditionally done your public hearing, which is a requirement, on the same night you take your vote. An alternative would be, and I'm not saying we change process about this at all, an alternative would be to get feedback in February, so do the public hearing in February, because then, based on that feedback, you can give direction to myself and the superintendent about how we might approach coming to a final budget for your review and vote in March. It may be that the conversations are much more with, the towns about what they're going to contribute with, than with community. But, I know from past experience that if, there's a gap and you have conversations about what things might not survive in the coming budget year, people will turn up to talk about, the impacts of that, and they might surface things that you as a committee may or may not have thought about, and so you may give different direction to the superintendent myself about, no, you can't cut that, it's gonna have to be something else, right? And I think that's where if we're in, and we're likely to be, just because, if you followed the MMA report that came out a few weeks ago, the ability of communities to raise funds to meet their needs is not keeping up with the inflationary pressures. And so it's likely we'll be gapped. And so hearing from the community at large in late February gives you, opportunity to discuss that at that evening, and then gives us time to then rework a little bit before you meet in mid-March to actually vote a budget. That also gives, that feedback can also be shared with finance committees, advisory committee, et cetera, to say, all right, given this feedback, we should maybe members of those committees that come and give some of that feedback, can be taken into account and help shape the vote that you take in March. And then of course, once you voted in March, then it's sort of, to a large degree, hopefully we'll be on the same page with the towns as far as funding, and so then we go into town meetings in May when the towns actually vote, and hopefully we'll approve the budgets. So that's sort of the rest of the picture. That's the way I see it. I think, like I said, my one suggestion would be that when we have a sort of second draft of the budget in late February, that's an opportunity for public hearing might be, give the public an opportunity to sort of express their opinions to you as a committee, and then for you to take that into consideration, provide feedback to Superintendent and myself, and then us make, adjustments before the March date. But that's just a suggestion, you guys.
Well,
go
I
ahead and say
don't
yes.
have an objection to that, the public hearing in February, we have to see. But when we have the meeting in March and we're gonna vote, I think we need to make sure that public comment is before we discuss the budget and vote, so that there's the second opportunity on the day, because
Right.
people are sometimes tuned more into the vote than the
Right.
public meeting, but if we have the public comment first at that meeting, then we've given them now really two opportunities, the community to come and tell us, right, because we're just duly represented designees of the community. So what I'm hearing is we want to plan a meeting in December. Do we want to, of this group, let's not get confused. Of this group, we want to plan a meeting in December with early numbers, with confidence intervals. God, I love that. Do we want to plan a meeting of this group in January, close to but before the January 22nd meeting, when you're going to be presenting to the full school committee better numbers with narrower confidence intervals, hopefully. Is this sounding good? And then probably another meeting of this group in February, shortly before the public hearing.
Yes, because I think the boards will be able to provide feedback to us in these smaller group sessions too, which will
Absolutely,
even help us.
absolutely. Okay, so, all right, so we kind of have ideas for 3 meetings, one in December, one in January, one in February. Do we want to, well, okay, first, before we start talking about actual dates for future meetings, we go back to the agenda. One thing we haven't discussed at all, the asbestos-laden tiles in the middle school.
Containing.
As if there couldn't be another bad surprise in the middle school.
Well, so in each of our buildings, we have asbestos in most of them. There's, I can't say for certain if there is any in this building, but it's not beyond comprehension that there wouldn't be. They still do.
This building's only 12 years old, there should be no asbestos in this building.
There's still, asbestos still gets used in construction at times, depending on how you, and what you construct. How much it gets used is far less than it was, 15, 20 years ago, but it's still a valuable construction tool. And it's also critical that you manage it properly. And so one of the things we do is we have an asbestos management plan that we're, looking at and following and reviewing on a periodic basis. So when the sort of question came up in the middle school relative to some tiles that are starting to lift a little bit, our facilities folks reached out to, get their name right, we have a consultant, an environmental consultant, Green Environmental Consulting, who helped us with this. And so they will be in the building on Wednesday to take a look. You know, I'll quote from the email. It's, you know, the floor tiles are asbestos containing but not friable, meaning that they are unlikely to release asbestos fibers into the air. Small disturbances like the lifting or minor chipping we've observed typically don't release fibers, so the risk to staff and students is very low. And so, in the meantime, we've taken some actions. I think you may have seen those. We're covering and taping areas of concern. And I think the other thing is that the first, you know, if you do need to take formal action, abatement action, the first thing you have to do is a project deadline or a scope of work. And that's one of the things that GEC, when they come on Wednesday, will take a look at and perhaps give us direction about how we might proceed. And so we'll know more. You know, they'll come on Wednesday. It will take them a while to process what they see and what their recommendations are. We'll get that report from them. It will shape our capital planning for the middle school building probably, because there may be action steps we need to take that are more immediate. If they're urgent and need immediate addressing, then, you know, we'll have to strategize about how we, you know, accommodate that from a budgetary standpoint. But if they're manageable in the short term and keep the risk low enough, then we'll be more extensive in sort of our approach relative to capital planning and replacement and management of those as we move forward. Because there's a number of places in the building that have those same types of tile. Not all of them are, you know, lifting or cracking in the way that they've, you know, demonstrated more recently for us. So I think there's sort of, you know, the more immediate concerns that we want to address, whether that's immediate in the sense of the next couple of months, or if that's immediate in the sense of the next fiscal year. And then we have a longer term, deeper investment in the building that we need to think about as far as part and parcel of how we approach that. And in some ways that's, you know, in all of our buildings that have some level of asbestos, especially in any areas that are more public, you know, we have an asbestos management plan where we're looking at those, and when we have opportunity to take it, you know, action, we will. You know, and so this, you know, is like that. It sort of presented itself in a more emergent way than we, you know, were anticipating or hoping for, but that's nonetheless where we sit at the moment.
For tiles that are lifting but aren't broken, can they be re-glued?
GCN will tell, or GEC
They will. They will tell us.
Yeah,
That's
that'll be
a
part of the
possibility.
scope of work. They may, you know, that may very well be part of what they do, or, you know.
One of the main ways we manage is through waxing.
Yep.
There are very thick coats of wax on a lot of floors.
Right. So encapsulating is one of the things you do, and wax can serve that purpose. And that may be our immediate short-term solutions to go in and really lay, you know, some serious amounts of wax in some spaces there. You know, but again, that's a intermediate step. Is the way I would describe that. So we'll see what they you know, suggest to us as far as, you know, actions and next steps, and of course cost.
I mean, I'm starting to put together in my mind the cost of the windows and the doors. Now the floors are going to have to be ripped up or redone. The building needs at least 8 more classrooms added to it.
Don't forget HVAC.
The HVAC, the entire heating cooling system is going to need to be replaced. You know, I mean, I understand we're going to have to foot the bill for, well, the town of Wilbraham is going to have to foot the bill for a full building assessment, but it's difficult to imagine a pathway forward for the current Wilbraham Middle School building.
So that sort of leads into the other topic on the agenda, which is the MSBA projects. So we got approved for 3, which I told you about.
Great work!
You know, it's good news. You know, I'll say when I submitted the statements of interest, I don't think the state had finalized the change to how they fund it, or if they had, it was so new I didn't recognize it. So there's a lot more funding, so they're funding 93 different projects. And I think it's either 43 or 45 different school districts. This is just an accelerated grant, it's separate from the school building, full building or full renovation type projects that they're also funding. So they, after having sort of starved or been challenged to fund what they knew were the needs of communities around the Commonwealth, they are able to more actively pursue these. So we were fortunate to get all three move forward in the process. I have a call scheduled Thursday morning because I wanted to pose a few questions regarding how deeply they'll look at the facility, particularly the middle school, but in some respects the others. When you do a full building evaluation, the schematic design and the feasibility study that you do is quite extensive. You do when you do a full building construction, they look very deeply at your educational plan. You have to create an educational plan. They look very closely at your projection of number of students. What are you trying to put into this building? There's a whole host of things they look at pretty deeply with regard to that. For accelerated repair, I don't think they do quite as deep a look. So part of my question to them will be, to what level will they evaluate, is this a good investment or not, to put doors and windows into this facility? Or is there so much that we need to do that we should pivot and consider something different or not? At the same time, when you have we had an MSBA project for the roof at the middle school. I think it officially was done during 2020. And so there, if you stop using a building for educational purposes, there's essentially a recoupment process for that. Also, if you close a school and then subsequently ask them for money to build a new one, they look very closely at that. And so if it's something you couldn't have anticipated, they're very forgiving of those sort of circumstances. But if you closed a facility and you said when you close the facility, because there's a whole process you're supposed to go through relative to that, if you closed a facility and then you subsequently want to do a core project where you're building a new building or whatever, they're potentially discounting your application relative to others if you just did a poor job of planning, is a short way to say it. I mean, they consider whether or not you were disingenuous in the process and said, oh, no, we don't need that school, and then you subsequently go, hey, can we build a new school? That's a factor when they consider the projects and the financing of those projects. So, so I'm going to talk to the folks from MSBA a little bit about that, because I think the questions that were raised at the planning meeting around the middle school a little bit was some of those things like, oh, do we need to be a bit more holistic in our thinking around all of our capital needs for buildings? Should we, kind of double down on our roof investment in that middle school and do the other things we need to do the doors and windows now, potentially do some other investments in that building in the coming years, whether it be, HVAC and or additions and or whatever, or not. I mean, so I'm going to pose some of those questions about how they evaluate some of that, and how, the fact that we did put a roof on a few years ago impacts that conversation.
Can you repeatedly apply for the accelerated repair program? So we apply now for the doors and windows, but then can we say, like in a year, well, so I know they're in the 2 year cycle, and then say, oh, we're applying for this every 2 years?
Yeah.
Do they, if you continuously apply, is there a negative effect?
So where there might be a...
Where they say like, okay, you've gotten your fair share, let's give some other districts an opportunity?
I think that largely they're trying to evaluate the project on its own merits. And so if the need is demonstrated, which is often just, sort of age of something, 31 years for doors and windows.
Sure.
25 years, I think, for roofs. It meets certain criteria. They evaluate them on their own. If you, on the other hand, submitted for a project and said no thank you, got approved and said no thank you, does that negatively impact your next request that might be similar to that or not? I don't know, I don't think it's supposed to, but, you know, they are human beings that are on the board and they don't turn over that much, but I think they
Well, that's
consider
why I'm
progress.
hoping that maybe we can do a more thorough, because we have to do the assessment as part of the MSBA.
That's right, and so that's part of the question.
And I've been given the impression that Wilbraham's on board with getting the assessments done on all 3 buildings.
Yeah, I mean, to move forward in the project, we do have to, you know.
If we
do
get a
have to do
more
the
thorough
feasibility.
assessment, and if we end up backing away from the middle school, you know, if it's informed and evidence-based from the assessment
Yeah.
that they gave us,
Yeah.
but
How
if they
would we
do the
back
assessment
away-
and they said, you'd be a fool to put more money in this building, well,
No,
then.
but how would we back away from the middle school when we just put a new roof on it with SBA money?
We put the new roof on 5 years ago. It would take another, okay, let's hypothetically, and this is like a million light years away, right? But let's hypothetically, let's say right now, today, both towns decided, we're building a new regional middle school. It's not gonna be open for 10 years.
Right.
So that'll be 15 years
No, I'm
after the
saying
project. There'll only be 5 years of life left in the cost of the roof that was done. It was only a few $100,000 project to start with. So the money that we would have to have taken back wouldn't be a lot. However, you know, when we go in for the windows and doors now for $7, $8, $10 million, whatever it ends up being, that's a much, you know what I mean? Like, right, we'll get our hands slapped, we might get a little bit burned on the roof, but it's a lot less money than if we do the windows and doors, and then, but that's enough, that is a pathway forward for the middle school, Wilbraham Middle School, where, you know, we do the windows and doors, and then 2 years later, we do the HVAC system. And then 2 years later, we go into the core building program to put an addition onto the building. And then, hopefully nothing else has fallen apart. And then 2 years later, we go for whatever, the
Well,
only
we could use
problem
the middle
is,
school building for other educational purposes.
that's the other thing, if you look at the NASDAQ
So I think we
numbers,
need to maybe, as a committee, just get together and say like, what's our plan? You know, and, because right now, we had a 5-year plan, and part of that 5-year plan is, what are we gonna do with our buildings? And, you know, we have we meet with the planning committee and stuff, and right now, we're just getting bogged down on just trying to get the towns to agree about the middle school, right? And try to get that,
well, this is the
the
biggest,
agreement to be, you know, agreed upon by certain powers before it goes back to the voters. But I do think that we do need to.
That was the end of our planning committee meeting, so that's how we finished with looking at.
I mean, that's the biggest barrier to following the pathway forward with multiple MSBA projects to fix up the middle school, is that the building is currently owned by Wilbraham. And at what point is Hamden going to be willing to step in and start helping with $5 to $10 million jobs? Right, and that's, so.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, sort of so one of the other things I wanna ask the MSBA about on Thursday is what does that recoupment sort of question look like? You know, because they have a memo that when you pull it out, actually still says draft across it from like 2007, that talks about, you know, proportional to the, you know, their investment proportional to the value of the building if you sell it, or the lease value, you know, that kind of thing. So it you know, but they don't talk much about if you use it for some other purpose, like other public purpose, but not educational. You know, if you're not, you know, if the town of Wilbraham decides to use the building for other things, well, that's a different category. It's not really articulated well in there. So I'm gonna sort of pose those questions. One of the things I do wanna really press them about is a little bit is to what extent do they evaluate the you know, the reasonable life of the building and the overall needs. You know, so one of the things, like if you're gonna put a roof, so like with Stony Hill and with Mile Tree, when they do the roof project, one of the things that's compulsory in that schematic design and feasibility is to evaluate the roof and its capacity for having solar put on it. So that's a, you know, that's gonna be a requirement that it's in there. We can't avoid that in any way. But are there other questions we can pose around feasibility, you know, and useful life of the building and other, you know, evaluations of the long-term capacity of the building to meet the needs of the district? How much of that can we pose? How much of that can we explore within the work we have to do? And how much of that is reimbursable versus just something we might want to pay for and do because it makes sense to do that? The key thing is, you know, if we're moving forward in the process, you know, there's a series of documentation we have to put together. That's the thing that I'll work with the town on, making sure we got all our, you know, materials together for submission. But the key thing is that, you know, by June 1st of 2026, we'll have to give them clear indication that we've got funding to pay for the schematic design and feasibility. And whether that's for 1, 2, or 3 projects is part of the process we're gonna go through between now and then, and really till March, because that's about the time frame in which the, you know, the questions will have to be put onto the warrant for the town meeting. The fortunate thing with them selecting the date in March, like I said the other day at the full school committee meeting, is it gives us essentially a June 1 date that allows us to use the sort of annual town meeting as an opportunity to sort of have the discussion and have the vote for funding. And then the deadline for having full project funding is essentially a year from then, which is basically June 1st of 2027. Again, aligns with the town meeting process. So I think there's opportunity to, and that gives us, you know, a fair amount of time for them to do the schematic design work and that other work that can help answer the questions. But I think, to your point, some of the things that we need to articulate is one of the questions we want to try to address, particularly about the middle school, but more broadly, all the buildings. Several of them have a few years on them in both towns. And so is there a sort of master plan for those buildings? How does that fit into a broader picture with both communities around their capital planning process? And you know, these are all going to be large-scale projects ultimately, so, you know, the conversation of borrowing to do it is going to be likely a way to make it affordable, because a single, you know, cash expenditure will be just too high for the towns to be able to take on, I think. That's you know, it's an opinion, and I think that, you know, given what we know what things are costing the states, that's a likely case, but we've got a strategy of how we're approaching thinking about all those buildings. And the other thing is, over the next, you know, several years, this building will start to have its capital needs too. They're going to fit into that conversation and that picture as well. So all of that has to be framed, at least, maybe not specifically articulated in this project, that project kind of specific thing, but some overarching intents or likely avenues to explore. And then, you know, there'll need to be, you know, commitment by both, you know, school committee and town boards and committees to say, yeah, this is broadly how we're going to approach this over the next 10, 15, 20 years. Obviously, circumstances will be dependent upon what happens during those times. You know, you can't count on it, but if you have a broader range of strategy, I think you can make some plans and try to think about it and be, you know, proactive in planning the funding for that. And the big scary numbers.
I guess,
I mean, you know.
to revisit something that we just talked about again, about the E&D number, and that we have been using $700,000 in our budgets that we've been playing around with now, you know, planning for 2027. I just want to, are we sure that we don't want to keep that $700,000 there? Are you sure we want to change that number to 0?
I think it'll be a lot easier to put it in than to take it out later. I think that's what Michelle was thinking, right?
Can you say that again?
that it would be a lot easier to put 700,000 of E&D
Yeah,
into the budget than to take it out later. Like, what if we have to come up with $600,000 to deal with the asbestos problem in the middle school in the next month? Where else will that come from, right?
Yeah.
I think that what's great is
Other
that
places.
our E&D is no longer an assumption, we know what the number is, it's been certified.
Yeah.
So I think we have some work to do to figure out what wewe're going to do.
I just want
How
to
we're
put your
going to use
attention
it.
on the optics of what that's going to look like to the town when we make a presentation and there's no E&D in the budget towards paying down the assessment.
Well, I think that we just haven't determined, I mean, Doug got the numbers this evening, so it's not, I don't think that the optics will look poor, that we're saying, you know, within just a few hours, we haven't decided on what that allocation is going to look like. We're just saying, right now, tonight, I can't, you know, my own opinion is I don't know what that number would be.
Right.
But I think that, yes, we do have to make a decision, and we have to be, you know, thoughtful about.
And
Yeah.
you agree with Michelle on this, is that what you're?
I agree with Michelle to the extent that I certainly expect we're going to be putting a sizable amount of E&D
Yes.
to the school assessment.
Okay.
I'm not, like, if you turn back the clock 2 years ago, the entire balance of E&D was put to the school assessment, and I never recall that being discussed at any meeting that I was present until it was already done. Which was, I just kept my mouth shut because there was enough turmoil going on at the time, but, you know, I would be okay with at our December meeting if Doug presents the assessment numbers, and then if we put 700,000 of E&D towards it, this is how those numbers change.
Correct.
I think I'm okay with that, or, you know, whatever the balance is, keeping 500 in the coffer, assuming we haven't had to spend it all between now and December to deal with an urgent asbestos issue.
So,
Right. Yeah, my official stance is as of November 10th, I can't commit to a specific number, but yes. Is it likely that we will be committing money? Yes. What that amount is, I can't commit to a number tonight.
yeah, I think that to the point of sort of a sensitivity analysis or, you know, that's one of the sort of knobs we turn to sort of show the impact, you know? I mean, whether it be that or whether we think state aid, you know, what happens if state aid goes up? And, you know, we can put that in and make it dynamic for people to see, you know, sort of what happens to assessments when those numbers change. Because, you know, I think that, I will state my personal opinion about this. I think to spend all of E&D is not a wise approach. Just because, as we experienced in the last week, stuff comes up, right? And so you need some ability to sort of accommodate that. At the same time, I mean, part of the reason the state puts a 5% limit on regional school districts for that number is so you don't sit on cash that towns gave you to spend on the kids, right? So it's like, okay, correct. I wish the numbers, personally, I think that a little constraining because I think it makes it hard to do some planful things, but at the same time, it's not too bad. But I do think, you know, having an amount of E&D that you want to hold in reserve, you know, at the start of this fiscal year, that number was, you know, in the $300,000 range, which, you know, it's okay. I mean, my comfort level is a little higher than that, and, you know, I also recognize that it's, you know, part of the conversations with the towns about how to go about it, but see, you know, but I think showing how assessments are impacted by that choice or by state aid or by, pick another thing, insurance, you know, percentage change in insurance costs, you know, those are all important, you know, variables to understand and have everybody on the same page about how those will evolve over the course of the budget process, and if you know, committee decides to commit a certain amount to E&D, that which isn't committed is, you know, particularly why you're doing that is also
Right.
important to say. This is a risk we don't want to take, because we could have three kids suddenly have a very expensive, you know, out-of-this replacement, or
Right.
pick a topic, you know.
But we also have, like, the new piece is Hamden has been very generous, Wilbraham and Hamden have been very generous. But Hamden has been more of, for the past few years, because they've been in a lot stronger financial position, they have been saying, well, let's see where Wilbraham lands and, you know, we can support that, right? So, but I think this year, which you were just saying before, that Hamden is in a lot different financial picture this year. So that's a whole nother piece of the puzzle that, you know, we've been very lucky to have Hamden in a different position in previous years. But I think this year, I think it's going to add to the complexity of what we're trying to do. Plus, I wanted to ask you, if it's recession, and it's called recession, and we are in a recession, I'm not saying we are, I'm just saying there's certain indicators
I'll
and
say we
stuff.
are. I'm comfortable saying that.
There you go.
Based on like 1,000 different indicators, but you know.
There you go. But what impact do you think that would have on us?
So I think my experience has been that the state lags by about a year. So I think it hits the private sector much more immediately. I think for you know, government things, it tends to lag a year. So, if the economy takes a hit, well, let's go back to 2008. The economy took a huge hit in 2008.
Right.
It really hit school districts in fiscal 10. That's when it really kind of, really the pedal hit the metal on that one, and that's where the sort of ramifications, played out, because, it's such a long process between like money earned by the public sector, taxes collected, state budgets get built. So there's always about a year lag. So, if we tip into recession and depending on how severe it is and how prolonged it is, fiscal 28 gets very challenging, and 29 gets even more challenging, and then it tends to recover. Now, Massachusetts has been fortunate in the last few recessions to have been much less severely impacted. The nature of the economy in Massachusetts has built itself, has been built in a way that it withstands that a little better than some other states. So it has been, with the housing crisis in 08, the state of Massachusetts was much more mildly affected. But if you go back to 91, cities and towns and schools took a huge beating in that, early 90s time frame,
Right.
because Massachusetts hadn't diversified its economy in a way that made it more resilient. Didn't have quite as much stuff in biotech, didn't have as much stuff in education, didn't have as much stuff in some of those sectors that have been resilient to the broader economy. So I think it's hard to say, but I think 28 where it would probably hit us a little more than 27.
Okay.
The other thing is that because this is just, all of the people in the state house are getting elected in fiscal 26, which means fiscal 27 for us, it's always a little better in any given year. There's opportunity. I mean, it's just the nature of the business. Like they can, if representatives and senators can bring home the bacon, as they say, they will, and that helps,
Right.
their election chances, and we just get to be the beneficiary of that if that's the case. So I'm hopeful that helps as well. They may, the worry is if they do that and then they don't sort of have money in the rainy day fund, and suddenly things get really bad for 27, right? So it can be a sort of, sunshine and then, hurricane kind of situation. But I don't, the state has been pretty good about modulating those things a little bit. Hopefully they'll continue to modulate those in a reasonable way, but that's my sense of it.
Thank you for that. I didn't register that lag that you were talking about. I'm glad I have that these now. Thank you.
Next meeting date?
Okay. We need a meeting date in December.
And
Not too early, so you can make good numbers, but not too late.
And this is, we are inviting the boards to this.
Oh,
meeting.
yes.
Yeah.
Capital as well, select boards, advisory, capital, gold.
Are we inviting select boards or just our liaisons?
No, the liaisons.
Okay, so just.
Yeah, the liaisons. We should stop harassing them.
If we're gonna meet on a Monday, I would suggest the 15th.
I was just looking at the 15th, I'm post-call. Because I have an extra weekend day of call in December, and it's that Sunday the 14th.
It is the first day of Hanukkah.
I'm
Camden
post-call, we can hold the
advisory,
meeting
they meet
before
at 6
sunset.
o'clock. Right,
Yeah,
They did go early.
yeah, so we'd have to do a 5.
We have to do a 5 because they meet at 6.
Who
Camden
meets at 6?
Advisory. Our liaisons, and Camden
Oh.
Advisory.
I'm good with 5. Monday, December 15th at 5 PM, okay. Well, let's see if it works for them,
Do we
and
feel
if
that-
not, huh?
Do we feel the conflict with Hanukkah is an issue? Or not? I mean,
Pretty sure it's
I
just me.
wasn't, what's that?
I said I'm pretty sure
Are
it's
there
just me,
any
so.
is there any participants here who are Jewish?
Just me.
You didn't know you were
Yes.
Jewish. Would you like us to pick a different
That's
day?
okay.
Are you sure?
Well, if we meet at 5 o'clock, it's okay.
Okay, well, it's winter, it might be dark.
That's okay, but my family has to be home too, so 5 o'clock works. To wrangle all of us, yes.
All right, so
I'm
let's
not
try for
impressed.
5 o'clock, but if it doesn't work for people, and in the email, point out, we just want you to be aware, this is the first day of Hanukkah, and if that doesn't work, then we'll do email chain to find another day. It's just gonna end up being earlier, right, which is then gonna, you know, now we're in the second week of December, and so. I'm a little worried that
If we had to meet the week before, I would, when's the school committee meeting? 4th and the 18th?
Yes.
14th, 20th, 11th, but, you know, I'll take all the time you can give me. I'll just say that. As a friend of my brother's often says, expenses rise to meet new income and work expense, all time allotted.
I'm gonna hope for the 15th, because I am on call the 11th.
What time does doesn't advisory have meetings on Mondays?
That's why we're meeting at
That's our,
5.
The
Okay.
select,
Meeting at
the
5.
Wilbraham Select
Because they
Board
meet at
meets,
6.
but
but we're just doing
you're correct, we're just doing the usual members of this committee.
our liaisons, which is, we don't have any from the board of select, like,
Correct.
it's not
So
Mike
it's just-
Swindow,
it's just Todd and-
Todd
And Patrick,
and Doug
and then Doug
and
and
Kathy,
and Priscilla.
So the 11th doesn't work for you?
and Capital though, but Camden
I'm on call, I would have to try to
Yeah,
switch,
they don't have to.
Okay.
which
So that's
would
just
be
me.
even more challenging, and but I can only discuss how extra challenging it is off of public camera.
Okay.
Right, so we'll go with,
So
I'll
not the
invite them
11th.
to the December 15th.
Let's see if it
We'll
works
see if
for
it
people,
works.
if not, we'll find another way, we'll figure it out.
Okay.
We always do, right?
Well, we only have that week, so we only have a certain amount of days
Yeah.
we can work within the month.
It'll be a good day, everyone will be in the Christmas spirit.
Yes.
And just so you all know that the busiest time of Amazon season,
That day.
Is that day?
Yeah,
Is it-
right around that.
Is that the busy, is that your nightmare day?
no,
Is it
our
Amazon
nightmare day
Prime?
this year is probably gonna be Monday the 22nd.
Yeah.
But Mondays are the biggest days, and, because
So
people
people
start
will
to
be
travel
ordering
and
stuff on the
stuff.
22nd and
Freaking
expecting
out.
it there for
No,
the
no, no, no,
25th?
no, delivery on the
Panic.
22nd.
Got it, oh, right, you're on the
I
delivery.
should have
I'm on-
probably
I'm on
ordered
the
that
delivery
weekend,
side
and then
first.
hopefully pick it up.
Oh my God.
We're
Monday, Tuesday
actual
delivery.
Santas, you know, we'll have our, you know, have our Santa hat and
You don't have to wear a hat, but you should wear a coat.
while we're in there.
The, traditionally, we have the, you know, I'm gonna try to remember the name of it,
Budget here.
the forum with
Oh.
the reps and
The
that,
round table.
Oh, right.
the round table. Is that usually in January?
Mhm.
I think we
But
did it
you know,
earlier.
if we have these conversations starting in December, and change how we approach that meeting. I'm just suggesting that broadly.
Okay.
It may be, because again, I think,
Is Martin Luther King Day a day we can meet on?
There's no-
Like, I'm looking to see if we wanted to meet on a day before the meeting on January 22nd. All right, so we can't meet on MLK Day. We could potentially meet on the 20th. I don't think we should set the date, because we should set the date at the next meeting where the other reps are here from the towns, but just to kind of have a plan. And,
But we could also suggest, I actually might put out a series of dates for people so they can put it on their calendar, because I think putting dates on people's calendars as we get through, they're gonna get busy with their select board meetings, so they have to attend their advisory finance committee meetings. So I think it might be a good idea to see if we could get some dates and get people to commit to some dates, or at least share their availability. So if we're thinking of some dates, I would recommend floating those.
I think the 20th
Our board
works
partners.
well. I have it
So
blocked
Tuesday, the 20th?
completely off in my calendar, and the reason that it's blocked off, I don't think is relevant anymore.
Tuesday, January 2026. And then,
February
That's-
23rd, because 26th is when the school committee meets.
Oh, I was talking about January the 20th?
No, I'm moving on to
That's fine.
February, and just suggesting, should we
Oh, we want to do February.
talk about the 23rd versus the school committee meeting on the
Wait, when's
26th?
February vacation week?
The 16th to the 20th.
The 16th to the 20th
Mhm.
is vacation week, and the school committee meeting is
26th.
the 26th.
and 23rd isn't out there.
I can do Monday the 23rd. Can you send me a summary email of these, Erin, so that I can forward them to my scheduler to, even before everyone's agreed, just,
Just,
it's always easy
that-
to hold and then get back than to take later.
Undo.
start time for this on the 23rd of February. Should stay with the 5. to
Well,
get
they're
people-
still meeting at 6 o'clock, right?
Right.
So
So
we
5.
should do 5.
Me being here earlier than 5 would be a challenge, but if it's a one time and I give enough notice, I can always.
Put 5, is okay?
Yep.
We've always traditionally met on Mondays though, right?
At 5.
But Hamden Advisory always meets at,
6:15, so yeah, so they leave, so usually
They
1 hour
they
meetings,
leave,
and then they.
what, keeps the meeting to an hour, okay.
Yes.
Sometimes you keep going.
Okay. Do they, would they want us to offer a room in the Minichog for them to hold their meeting if they wanna not have to run over to Hampton? Is that something that they would appreciate as a nicety?
They're nice.
That if
The
they,
town
if they
building.
want to, they're welcome to,
Yeah.
you know, if we could produce a room somewhere in the high school so they don't have to race across town after the meeting.
They have
But it's
other
totally
members
up
though, too,
Huh?
yeah.
Well, yeah, but if they post the meeting, they
Yeah.
can come here and, so, this is their building too.
And sometimes, just speaking, so I know their select board meets that night, so sometimes they attend each other's meetings, so that sometimes.
Yeah,
may be
so
problematic.
they might.
Not saying it's off the table, but just another,
And they're
I
still
just-
meeting at
Nuance.
the town house, they haven't switched to
town halls
TWB.
now at TWB, they're physically moving as we speak, so.
Oh,
maybe
Already?
next year, Yeah, yep,
Mhm.
so they'll
I
reopen on
thought they were
like
gonna
the
have to
17th.
do all kinds of renovations and stuff.
They did a few things that were necessary, but everything that townhouse is packed up and being moved currently,
Wow.
so there's no email.
Everybody happy with the room they got?
That was,
That was a thing?
yeah, well, two things, because there's no light, they did, determine and everything, so yeah.
All right, I'll send them all 3 dates then, because we have them
But by the way, that just moves it closer.
Yeah, makes it easier.
Yes, they're closer.
Mm-hmm.
Racing over the mountain in the fog and the snow is challenging.
Yes, it is.
Really?
We good?
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Oh, do we have to do a roll call vote? No, everyone said aye, so, okay. We are adjourned at 7:07 PM.
Just mystery.